On November 5th, 2020, the United Kingdom went into lockdown. They were trying to control a spike in COVID-19 cases. And if you look at the chart of cases, it seemed to work. But despite having the same lockdown measures, infections in Kent, an area outside of London, were still rising. In early December, the overall drop in cases led the country to relax restrictions anyway. And then, this happened. It wasn't until around this time that researchers realized that somewhere in Kent, the virus itself had changed. It was a new variant. It was more contagious, and it was spreading. By the time scientists gave it a name, it had spread to most of southeast England. 2 months later, it was in 30 other countries. 5 months later, it was the most common form of the virus found in the United States. Lately, more and more variants are emerging in various places around the world. So, why are they showing up now? And what does this mean for the pandemic? Viruses are very simple. They're basically just the shell of protein surrounding some genetic material, either DNA or RNA. That genetic material is made up of molecules that can be represented as a series of letters, like this. Each part of this code contains instructions for how to make one specific protein that allows the virus to function. A virus has one goal: to make more of itself. But because it's so simple, it can't do that on its own. So it uses you. Every time a virus infects a person, it uses their cells to make copies of itself, replicating this complex code again and again and again. But eventually, it makes a mistake. Sometimes it deletes or adds a letter, sometimes it flips them around. That mistake is called a mutation, and it slightly changes the instructions for making the virus. That slightly altered virus is a variant. Since viruses are constantly going through this copying process, it's normal for them to change over time. For example, this chart shows some of the mutations the SARS-CoV-2 virus has made since December of 2019. Most of the time, these mutations are harmless, or even make the virus weaker, and they quietly disappear without making any notable difference. But other times, a series of mutations occur that give the virus a slight edge over us, which is what scientists started to notice with SARS-CoV-2 back in September of 2020.
You're seeing specific mutations that do allow the virus to bind human receptors better and enter cells better.
Coronaviruses are covered in spike proteins that they use to bind with and infect human cells. The thing is, that binding isn't a perfect fit, so it doesn't always get past the cell's defenses. But the B.1.1.7 variant, which scientists later renamed the alpha variant, has multiple mutations on the spike protein. Mutations that make it easier for the virus to bind with cells, which can help make the virus more transmissible, which led it to become a dominant strain in many places around the world. But if SARS-CoV-2 has been mutating all along, why do the variants today, like this alpha variant, suddenly seem so much worse? It's important to remember that a virus doesn't make active decisions. It's not as if it creates a strategy within your cells. Mutations are random errors. But the longer a virus is around and the more people it infects, the more it will change. And the more those changes accumulate, the more chances the virus has to evolve into something more dangerous. These 4 variants, considered variants of concern by the World Health Organization, all have mutations on the spike protein. Delta, the most recent addition to this list, has been referred to as a double mutant, because while it has many different mutations, it has 2 significant ones we've seen before. This mutation seems to make the virus more transmissible. And a version of this one, found in 2 other variants, makes it easier for the virus to reinfect people who have already had COVID-19. Meaning these 2 mutations may have evolved to dodge our natural immune response. Fortunately, the immune response we get from vaccines is much stronger than our body's natural immune response. So, while we may see variants that make our vaccines somewhat less effective, most experts think it's unlikely one will emerge that completely evades our vaccines. But that doesn't mean it can't happen.
If you give the virus enough time and replicative cycles, it will sample a very large evolutionary space and find a solution to the problem we've presented it, which is vaccination and widespread immunity.
But even if SARS-CoV-2 doesn't get to that point, as long as the pandemic continues, and as long as the virus continues to spread, it will continue to make copies of itself. So, if we want to stop the variants, we need to stop the virus. The virus has evolved, but it hasn't morphed into something unrecognizable. The vaccines we have still protect against all the variants. The trouble is, we aren't getting those vaccines around the world fast enough, which is only giving the virus more time to change and ravage areas of the world that are still waiting. The rise of variants is a reminder that the pandemic isn't over, even if it feels like it is to some of us.
We need to stop this because we don't want a variant that affects immunity. And so that involves stopping replication everywhere.
You know, they do change their mind on them, but the CDC said it straight up. The more people that get vaccinated, the less chance this virus has to mutate, like what happened with the Delta variant that you're seeing going wild right now. But is there a new one we need to be worried about here in Florida? Nightside's Josh Sidorowicz verifies posts online about a Colombian variant.
Here's some of those posts about this supposed new COVID-19 variant from Colombia now spreading here in Florida. So let's verify. Our sources on this include the CDC and the World Health Organization, along with 2 virologists and a pathologist at the Miami hospital where these supposed cases are at. Okay, let's start with, there is a variant from Colombia known as B1621. Hasn't even been given one of those Greek letters yet.
We don't know a lot about the Colombia variant. We do know that it dominated the pandemics in some South American countries.
The earliest cases were documented in January, according to the WHO. Here in the U.S. right now, the CDC says this variant accounts for just about 2% of all cases. So far, though, our sources say vaccines don't appear to be any less effective against it, but it's not entirely clear yet if it's more severe or more contagious, like Delta.
The Colombian variant is very spotty across the U.S. We've only had a handful of cases here in Baltimore. There have been some cases in New York City. It's never established itself as a dominant virus in any geographic area.
As for here in Florida,
we've found it.
Dr. David Andrews, chief pathologist at Jackson Health System in Miami, confirms at their hospital, the Colombian variant accounts for about 10% of recent COVID-positive patients. But
we don't know yet how much of a presence this is, and we're going to be doing sequencing weekly now for the next several weeks, and I think it's going to become apparent whether or not this is going to be a trend or if it's just an isolated observation.
So yes, we can verify the Colombian variant has reached Florida.
I just want to give you some context here. Back in May, the CDC said that 1% of all new cases were the Delta variant that they accounted for in the U.S. Now it's about 80%, so you could see in just a few months how things could change. But for now, doctors and researchers have told Josh that the Delta variant is still, by far, their biggest concern.
If you're trying to find the nearest place to get tested, we have links to that on our story on the free 10 Tampa Bay app. There you can also get more information on COVID cases here locally and across the nation, along with where to get a vaccine.
The Delta variant is now fueling more than 90% of the infections in the United States. But recently, another variant has started getting some attention, the Lambda variant. Our ABC 10 News anchor Derek Stahl is going in depth on what makes Lambda different and which variant has doctors more concerned.
Health officials in Peru have launched round-the-clock vaccination centers to try to slow the spread of Lambda. Peru had the world's first cases of the variant late last year. Since then, Lambda has taken over, and Peru's death rate has surged. The country now has the worst COVID mortality rate in the world. Lambda has spread across South America, appearing in at least 30 countries, including the U.S. The World Health Organization labeled it a variant of interest in June, one step below a variant of concern.
The Lambda variant is the son or daughter of the Gamma variant.
UC San Diego virologist Dr. Davey Smith says the Lambda variant started as an offshoot of the P1 or Gamma variant originally found in Brazil.
It evolved and it got some key mutations in it that probably make it more infectious. And now it's outcompeted its dad.
Lambda has several mutations shared by other concerning variants, including one at position 452. That's the part of the virus that actually attaches to cells, making it stickier and more transmissible. Several variants have a mutation at this spot, but Lambda uses an amino acid that hasn't been seen here before. Studies out this month show this one mutation makes Lambda about twice as infectious as the original version of the virus and suggest that Lambda is likely more infectious than Gamma and Alpha. But how does it compare to Delta?
In my gut sense, if Delta and Lambda went into a boxing ring, Delta would probably win.
UC San Francisco's Dr. Peter Chin-Hong says just look at the map. Lambda dominates in South America, but it accounts for less than 1% of the sequences worldwide. Meantime, Delta is in a lot more countries and makes up more than 90% of the sequences.
I'm much more worried about Delta and Lambda.
He says South America's struggles with Lambda may have to do with low vaccination rates and their use of less effective vaccines from China. A new study showed the antibodies produced by the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines still neutralize Lambda well. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine showed drops in protection against both Lambda and Delta, but experts say that vaccine will still protect against severe disease. Derek Stahl, ABC 10 News.
So far, there have been about 750 cases of Lambda here in the U.S. Dr. Smith said that most appear to be linked to travel from other countries.